joining us today for this courageous conversation session titled A Life in Public Service, 3 Stories of the Transition from the Military to Local Government. If you are watching this live, we invite you to turn on your cameras. Yes, all of you who are multitasking, eating lunch, doing other things, we'd love to see you in the courageous conversations. It's more of an informal session. It's not meant to be a formal briefing. We encourage interaction from the audience, so you can post your thoughts and questions and experience in the chat as we go along. And as a gentle reminder, please make sure that if you are not speaking, that your mute button is on. So all of you know this Thursday, November 11th, is Veterans Day. It's a time to honor those who are still alive and serving or have served. ICMA has over 600 members who have indicated military service on their profile, and probably many more who have not chosen to highlight themselves. But this is an opportunity to turn to your left and right, and if you know a veteran or someone who is still serving, to say thank you for the sacrifices that not only they have made, but that their families have made in their service to this country. So it's an important day to take that opportunity to do that. And we have an auspicious group of panelists for you today. Oftentimes, we don't think of veterans as being a group that is discriminated against, but it does happen. And Marty Hughes, our Assistant City Manager from the city of Kennesaw, Georgia, Dominique Lazo-Johnson from the city of Fayetteville, North Carolina, and Henry Hayes from the city of the town of Sudbury, Massachusetts, are going to tell us their stories today about serving their country and transitioning into local government. So with that, Marty, I'm going to kick it off with you and ask you to tell us a little bit about your background and what put you on the road to joining the military.
Excellent, Lynn. Thank you so much for having me. First, let me thank ICMA for having this conversation. I think it's very important that we as veterans, as military, those who served in the military, I think it's important that we talk about our experiences and our perceptions. I mentioned to my wife the other day about this conversation, and she goes, why are you talking? And my wife retired Air Force for 23 years. And I said, listen, veterans are a protected class as well, if you look at the federal law. And it's just something that we inherently don't understand or think about because we just do our time when we serve. But I definitely want to pass along my appreciation to ICMA. Also, definitely want to thank Lynn for being a part of this group, and Laura. Y'all are so dedicated to veterans causes and to what we do in ICMA. I would be remiss not to say thank you personally from myself. But also want to say thank you to Henry and to Dominique for being a part of this. It's been a great honor to get to know them and talk about their experiences as we prepare for this conversation. One thing I really want to start out with more than anything else is that I hope that people will take away, that the military is an entity. It is not one person or a group of people, but it is a microcosm of society. And I think sometimes people forget that we are just a mirror of what is out there in our great country. And we all come across many good people who serve in the military because they have the right intention in their heart. And I think I wanted to start out with that because I think it's very important as we have this tough conversation. But also too, I want to add that humans are humans. People are going to act in a discriminatory fashion. They're going to be insensitive and they're going to be ignorant. I mean, that's just the way of the world. You can't change it. My good friend Henry made a great quote to me when I first met him. And he said, as long as a man has skin, he has the ability to sin. And I think that is so spot on to what we're going to experience during these tough conversations. A little bit of background about myself. My father is of Irish descent. My mother is Mexican. So I had the great privilege of living in 2 different worlds. And that shaped who I am today. It's neither good nor bad. It's just how life experiences is for someone who is mixed race. You know, I saw some good things growing up, and I saw some bad things growing up, and how I was treated, how my mother was treated. Thankfully, though, my parents instilled in me a certain set of values, of Christian values, and they reminded me and my brother and my sister often, as we experienced some of those challenges growing up, that I don't let others define me, that is critical to who I am, and that it's also about a person's character. And that made a big difference for me. My mother was a migrant worker. She traveled up and down from Texas to Ohio, working in the fields. I had the great honor to attend her high school graduation because she was not afforded that opportunity when she was younger. And then she has constantly, even to this day, tells me about, it's all about education, Marty. It's all about education. My father served for 20 years in the Air Force. He's a Vietnam veteran. And I grew up seeing the camaraderie of being in the military, that sense of honor, that hard work. And it instilled in me to why I joined the military. It allowed me to have a great sense of appreciation every day for those who wear the uniform. And then as I started to looking at my career field opportunities, it just seemed so natural to go right into the military. And that way I could, you know, make a real impact and also adhere to some of those bigger values of why our country was created the way it is. Thank you.
Great. Such great points, Marty, about honor and camaraderie and hard work, all things that we get as part of being in the military. So thank you for sharing that. Dominique, do you want to go next?
I can. Sorry, I had to unmute myself. So a little bit about myself. I served in at Fort Bragg and Fort Hood, Schofield Barracks. So I was in the military approximately about 5 years. I ended up medically retiring from the military due to an issue that happened in the military. So very briefly, I just kind of want to skim over it. I was assaulted in the military, and that's what ended my military career. But prior to that, the reason why I joined the military was I was actually looking for, I guess, something more out of life. I grew up in Houston, Texas, and it's very diverse in Houston. So it's not like, you know, I wasn't introduced to other cultures or anything. But Houston, you know, even though it being a big city, I felt trapped. So I didn't really have anyone in my family that was prior service or anything like that. It was just, I had a couple friends, and, you know, they explained to me the process of joining the military and the benefits. And the benefits definitely helped my decision, but I also was looking at it as a career goal, something that I wanted to do for the remainder of my military career. So that's about all. I hope I answered your question.
Dominique, you mentioned some very big topics there that we can't just brush over. And so, you know, I'm going to take this opportunity now to just bring that out a little bit more for the audience. And, you know, I know these things are difficult to share, but that's why we're doing this. Anyone who has watched the news has heard stories of sexual assault in the military over the years, from many years ago with the drill sergeant's ring that went on in the, I don't even know when that was, the 90s, but it's always been an issue. Do you, and if you don't want to, just say no, but do you feel like sharing any more of what happened to you?
So Because let me just start off by saying the military does have classes where they, teach you about sexual assault, how to remain safe, how not to be a victim, basically. But what they don't really tell you is that you have to look out for your comrades, your brothers in arms, the people you serve with every day, people that you trust. So I didn't even really know the soldier. It just turns out we were in companies that was literally right next to each other. And he had been watching me for a while. So I went to have a dental procedure done. And this was around 11 o'clock in the morning. And I went to have a dental procedure done. And I was living on base. So that's something else that's like a misconception. People assume that because they're on base that they're protected. But that is not the case, because you can't really protect from soldiers when they have full access. So I went home at around 11 a.m. and then I got a knock on my door. I didn't even think twice. I looked out the peephole. I saw a uniform. I didn't even think twice. I opened my door because I had that same perception that I was safe because I was living on base. So anyways, I was assaulted, went to the emergency room, everything. And then as it turns out, this soldier was a serial rapist in the military. And you hear about stories like that, but you don't want to believe it because I didn't believe it. Again, when we would have the meetings, I just kind of brushed it off because I was never ever thinking, but there was a trial and everything. And it just, when that occurred, it really highlighted the fact that how some commanders will basically brush over the fact that they have a troubled soldier just because they can perform well. And that's exactly what happened. This guy was, according to them, a really good soldier. But he had several complaints before me of him sexually harassing, sexually assaulting, even a complaint of rape. And it was not addressed. It kept being glossed over and glossed over until he finally attacked me. And I had to fight for my life.
I am so sorry to hear about that, Dominique. And I think it brings to light what Marty said in the beginning, that the military is a microcosm of society. And there are bad people in every part of society, sadly. And that's why we're having these conversations today. So I admire your courage for being able to share with us, because I know it's not easy and it's very emotional. So thank you so much for sharing your story. It's very powerful, and it also highlights the fact that, broad daylight on a military base, you would think you would be safe. And so, not everyone is safe everywhere, and things do happen right under our nose that we don't want to believe these things are going on sometimes, but they are, and we can't ignore it. So thank you so much for sharing that story about your experience in the military, which was not the greatest and not what you hoped it would be, which would be a future career. But we're glad it brought you to local government. We're glad to have you here with us and working in local government. Henry, you haven't shared with us. Can you tell us a little bit about what brought you into the military and then into local government?
Thanks, Lynn. And thanks, Marty, and thanks, Dominique. For real. Thanks for sharing in that way. I'll tell you that, and we'll get to bias talk, I'm sure, but the halo bias, when someone is performing well in one area and then, we discount some other factors, that sometimes does show up. And I really hope that we all have the courage to step up and do what's right along the way, regardless of how well someone performs, right? No one deserves to be heard. I grew up in an Army household. I graduated high school at age 17, and the same day I left my parents' home, my mom's home. I got on a Greyhound bus and I went from Columbus, Georgia to Fort Worth, Texas on my own. Hardly nobody believed that I was leaving except for my best friend. And when I got out there, I was, now it's time to find my way as a young 17-year-old. I, thought I had my stuff together. I was very determined young fella, and I was on track to kind of get some things done, but I hadn't landed a job yet. And so I was doing all the things that people do to try to look for jobs. And one day I said, I'm going to take a break from looking for a job. I'm just going to go to the mall and I'm going to play with a recruiter. And literally that was my whole goal. And I went, and I wasn't new to recruiting. My dad being in the Army, and, we were, my high school had the ROTC and had all the visits and all that kind of stuff. And so I also anticipated that the recruiter was not going to be able to do something if I challenged them hard enough. And it was probably late June, early July. My birthday is in August. And I told him, if you can get me in before my birthday, I'll do it. And my dad taught me along the way that you hold your word, and even if you swear to your own hurt. And so I told the recruiter, if you can't do it, don't ever call me. My expectation was he would never call. And young fella called me back and he was like, how about the 10th of August? And I was like, carry the one, that's before my birthday. Okay. So it was not a wise decision as far as my process, but it turned out to be an amazing career and an amazing experience along the way. So I joined the Air Force at age 17, and it was because I challenged a recruiter and held my word when he called me back.
That is such a great story, Henry, and it highlights what a lot of us in the military believe in, which is sticking to your word and doing what you said you were going to do, and getting things done, never giving up, always looking for that way to get things done. So thank you for sharing that. Marty, you talked about how you ended up joining the military. What exactly did you do in the military?
Well, it took me 30 years to figure it out, I guess, because I did spend 30 years in the Air Force. My first 4 years, I had a great assignment, and I say that with a little tongue in cheek, but I was in nuclear operations at Whiteman Air Force Base. We used to always have the running joke in missiles that I could miss my target by 2 miles and still kill you at some point in time, whether it was through nuclear radiation or any other outcome that we would have from using our weapon. That experience taught me a lot about the reality of defending our country. I got to be a part of the team that involved the START treaties, in which the Soviet Union came to our base and as part of the inspections. So again, it gave me a very large scale understanding, not only about defending our country, but also knowing that our adversaries had nuclear weapons as well. And a great 4 years, but thankfully the Air Force did the right thing for me, and I was able to cross-train into my education and my passion. And I spent 20 years as a civil engineer. Was able to spend 2 tours at 2 different major commands, one in Germany and one at Air Mobility Command in Illinois. Had the pleasure of also being at the Pentagon for a time period. That's a whole nother world in itself. But again, it was a great exposure as an engineer to be at those levels. Spent a lot of time at base level, was a unit commander twice. And I had some great mentors along the way. Two of them who eventually became the Air Force Civil Engineers. So I felt, one, I had a really good support structure as an engineer, had some great mentors along the way, that eventually I got promoted to colonel, and had people work for me that was all different backgrounds and nationalities. I worked for different people from all different backgrounds as well. Was able to serve twice as a mission support group commander. That's what we call in the Air Force. The Marines or the Army, Navy, y'all might know that as a installation or garrison commander. Basically, my people, my units were responsible for all aspects of the base except for fixing and flying the planes. That was in a completely two other organizations. As I was starting to transition, people asked me, what'd you do in the military? And of course, people don't understand what an installation or mission support group commander is. And so I'd say, I was a city manager, I was an assistant city manager equivalent. More people in the civilian world as I was transitioning understood what that was. And so I felt like, okay, I'm using the right key buzzwords here. And so that was critical to better explain what I did and what I encourage those that I even talk to this day as they're transitioning out, how it's important to use those right words so people can better understand what we do and have done in the military. One thing I do want to add, as I mentioned before, my mother was all about education. As a part of joining the military, I tried to get as much education, much training as I could, professional military education, but I also have 3 master's degrees. And so I was blessed to be able to use that time wisely and to make my mother proud, as she tells me often with that. Thank you.
Gotta make your mom proud, Marty. So that's great. And I was just in a meeting last week where we were talking about the similarities between installation manager and city manager, and what does that mean? All of the things that fall under the city, like the snow removal, grass cutting, keeping the lights on, streets, all of those things, and many, many others, which you all have told me over and over again. You don't know what's going to happen next, even during the session today. So yeah, it's very interesting how the 2 jobs equate to each other. And Dominique, I just realized that you and I were both Army, and Henry and Marty were both Air Force, so that's interesting. And Dominique, I think you have a medical background. You were in the medical profession, so tell us what you did.
So I was a combat medic, and I was a licensed practical nurse. In the military, basically what I did was I would set up hospitals, work on patients. I was more of a trauma casualty assistant. So what I do now is completely different from what I did in the military. However, the fact that it was what I did was very detailed as far as like managing situations, projects, step by step, how I had to like, perform certain functions. I want to say that gave me discipline and everything, and it sort of does equate to what I do now as far as like project management. So, and even though I don't use my medical background, and I can't really say that I do use it. I was going to say it does come in, handy sometimes, especially with COVID. And me being a project manager, I had to put on certain functions where other people, they wouldn't know too much about what we could and couldn't do as far as like medical guidelines and things of that nature. And I was able to help out with some of that, a lot of it actually, because of the history that I have. So that's what I did in the military.
Great, thank you. Yeah, and so many times someone who doesn't have any experience with the military immediately puts those blinders on, which are police work or to work with the fire department. We forget about all the other professions that are done in the military as well as in the civilian world. Like Marty was just talking about civil engineering. So it all comes into play. Really, being in the military is about working with people. It's a people business is what we like to say, amongst other things, but that easily translates to the civilian sector. So Henry, remind me, what did you do in the military?
So, you know, being the young fella that did not have a guaranteed job, of course, when you just say you give a challenge like that, I ended up in aircraft maintenance. Great field. I found out what my job was in basic training, and then I was like, "What is that? What is aircraft structural so aircraft structural maintenance? What is that?" You know. What's the trip is I'm not really all fired up about airplanes. But it worked out. I did that for almost 15 years, 14 plus years. And then I went into education and training. And after that, I became a additional duty first sergeant during that time while I was doing education and training. And then I became a diamond wearing first sergeant, a full-time first sergeant. And then I sat in a couple of interesting seats as a first sergeant. I made senior master sergeant and chief master sergeant. I was diamond wearing as a master sergeant, senior master sergeant, and a chief master sergeant. Worked in the Pentagon as a first sergeant, major commands, all of that kind of stuff. And then I became a command chief. So.
Man, they really got you young, Henry. A 17-year-old, didn't know what he was gonna do, and off you went, and look where it's brought you today. That's pretty amazing, and is an example on how the military can help people get into what is ultimately their dream job. So that's great. So we've spent around the first 30 minutes talking about your background, who you are, and what brought you to where you are today. But now I'd like to switch focus a little bit and talk about discrimination. And Henry, you mentioned the term halo bias, which I've not heard that terminology before, but it really makes sense. The person who is great at their job, but in other areas of their life is not doing so great. So I wanted to ask each of you about your time in the military and if there was any discrimination. And Dominique, will come back to you last, and I'll start with Marty, I guess.
Okay, you know, I mentioned before about having some really great mentors, and they knew I was a Latino, but I also have the last name is Hughes. So I think there are probably some perceptions, some assumptions that were being made. But I personally have never really experienced any discrimination. I like to think that my hard work got me to where I am today. But there is always some of those side jokes that I would hear even amongst my peers growing up, using some terms that are disparaging to Mexicans that work in the field, or just some of those stereotypical comments people would make. But it was done in a joking manner. But again, it was not enough that I would have to go in there and get in anybody's face, and it was not often that happened. So I want to be very clear. I always took it as those few people that would make those kind of comments were just jerks anyways, and I always avoided them as it is. I probably would say I can tell everybody this. I saw my wife get treated very different as a female in the military. I saw firsthand how people were misogynistic towards her. And, she is stubborn enough, and she overcame that, retired as a lieutenant colonel after 23 years. So again, being that microcosm of society, I think is very expected. And you're always going to have people that are going to say and do the wrong things. And I personally just would not let that define who I was. Some people want to talk about those unconscious bias. They want to talk about favoritism, or just trying to be as impartial as we can as a human being, especially in leadership positions. I mentioned briefly before, I worked for males and females who were all of different colors, and they all worked for me that were all of different colors as well. Some people are going to have perceptions that maybe an administrative action was taken because of their color of their skin, or, hey, I didn't get that assignment because I'm a female. You're always going to deal with those in the military. And sometimes it made me think about, okay, am I being fair? What is the perception? Because some people's perceptions is reality. Now, I can't fix people's perceptions. After an investigation, if I have to punish you, then you have to get those appropriate actions. But at the end of the day, thankfully, in the civil engineer community is small enough that you was always trying to build the best team that you could, and you tended to run into the same people over time. Again, that's just because of the size of the civil engineer career field. I had the pleasure to serve on multiple promotion and education boards because in the Air Force, they're required to have so many minorities on these boards. And I checked that block for the Air Force. I took advantage of that because it gave me a great experience. And I was able to take that back to my people and show them and tell them about, hey, here's what it takes to get promoted. Here's what people are looking for in your records. Here's how, if you want to get that class, that's a very unique and special class in the DoD, here's what it takes. Here's what your package should look like. So, again, if I can help my people, that's what I was all about. At the end of the day, I would say this, I lived in two worlds. Most of it was very good in the military, and I appreciate those that were able to mentor me and know who I am. And I can't be more appreciative of that. Thank you.
Wow, you mentioned so many great things, Marty, and you talked about perception and reality, and ultimately, I think just being the best person that you can be and being aware of other people's realities. So every day I make mistakes. And even when you're trying to be the best person you can be, you screw up sometimes. And that's just part of life. I think the important thing about these sessions, these courageous conversations, is that we can call each other on it. So, and I would hope that you and Henry and Dominique, if I say anything that's offensive an hour in the future, that you would certainly say, hey, you might not have meant it this way, but this is what it sounded like to me, because we all get in our own little bubbles. And if we're not experiencing something on a daily basis, we forget to even consider it. So, and so much of that happens. And I think it's important to talk about. So Henry, do you have any experiences like that to share?
I've never experienced any kind of discrimination of any type in my life at any point. And if you believe that, then
I wish that were true, Henry.
I wish it was true too, and we're talking about in the military. So I'll tell you at one of my first bases, I was invited to go out on a hunting trip. We were having a conversation and someone said, you've never been hunting? I was like, no. And the guy said, I'll take you. And someone pulled up on me in the break room and said, dude, you better not go with him. There's a movie out called Surviving the Game or something like that. This was way before that movie, but this guy told me, he said, you would be the one that's hunted if you went out with him. And later on, that same individual that invited me out to go hunting with him, he said in a informal session that had his grandfather known that he worked with Blacks, that he would be beaten, and that he was just getting to the point to where he was getting to be more comfortable And this was a leader within the force, but nothing adverse happened. Regarding, I didn't go hunting with him, all that kind of stuff. I've seen a lot of things over the time, and you wonder why someone does something or what's the motivation behind it, and and it is what it is, right? The thing is, I did my level best to represent and represent those things which were right. And even as I became a senior leader throughout my career, we would often have discussions about military justice, and you'd have the factors, demographic factors that we would talk about, and sometimes they would try to point at the commander as a person who may have some kind of bias that's not right, or the first sergeant or the chief. But oftentimes the ones that could go more unnoticed would be those frontline supervisors that are building the packets and building the write-ups on the individuals that is eventually presented to the senior leaders in the organization. So it's just a matter of how you deal with the things that come your way, how you deal with your thoughts and perceptions and the realities in some cases, and then you simply move on. And do your best work and to live your best life. Otherwise, you're at risk of falling prey to making a costly mistake even when someone else is in error.
Oh my gosh, Henry, mind management, that's a topic I read about a lot, and it is so hard, the ability to say this person said something or did something and they are not right, and it is not in my best interest, but I need to let it go so that I can be the best person that I can be. And I don't know how people do that. I don't know how you have managed to do it. It is so challenging. So Dominique, you talked about your experience with sexual assault, which was absolutely horrible in the military. And I hope your answer is going to be no to this next question, but I know that I experienced being a female, short female in the military, more petite. I always felt like I had to work harder, be stronger, be better, just to be at the same level as my male peers. Did you ever experience anything like that?
Definitely. Day one at the gate, basic training, like what everyone, was kind of mentioning. I feel like they're a lot tougher on the women, and the names that they call us, they're degrading, they're demeaning. So it's like they build this unhealthy culture, this unhealthy stigma around some of the female soldiers. So it does make it harder for us. Like, kind of like what you were saying, I'm 5'2", okay? And we would have these ruck marches. And the people that they would have in the front were, of course, these 6 foot tall men that are literally taking, like, for their one step, it's probably like 2 jogging for me, if that makes sense, because they have a longer stride. So it was several times like I just had to catch up, and being stronger. Yes, that was definitely one thing, because a lot of people wouldn't imagine trying to jog with about 40 pounds on their back. A lot of people wouldn't imagine that. Some people don't have to jog if they have longer legs, but being shorter, you do have to overcompensate. So just to keep up, just on something that simple as a ruck march, I remember how difficult it was. I also remember when I got to my unit, though, I want to say that it was different because my first line was a female, and really nice Hispanic female too.
And by first line, you mean your immediate supervisor?
Yes. And immediately when I came, she was like, I'm not gonna have, kind of like the typical talk they have with the women. I'm not gonna have any of that crybaby stuff. I don't care, cupcake, stuff like that. And also, it was really difficult because I had children. Okay, so that was another issue, facing discrimination because I would hear the jokes, when I couldn't, I guess, like be at work sometimes because I had to make sure that my children were in daycare, anything like that. I would hear jokes about how females, ruin the army, how we're the problem and things like that. But with my NCO, she did everything she could to like get me promoted fast. And that's exactly what was happening. Because again, I did have to work harder to like combat the stereotypes and everything. So I ended up being a pretty stellar soldier. I do want to mention this though. I don't feel like I ever really just was attacked or demeaned more personally than when I was assaulted. And you would think that the victim does not have to defend their character, but that's exactly what happened because the immediate bias follows, after an assault. Were you drinking? What were you wearing? Did you lead him on? And I literally had to, jump through all these hoops to prove that I did nothing wrong. And that was the really unfortunate part. And so I want to say that those biases that they put on women when you first come in about them being like, and then certain marks that you may have on your body, they'll say, oh, she's open for play in nicer terms. So with them putting that out there and fostering that culture, unfortunately, I want to say that did kind of promote or encourage or facilitate the assault on me. So if some of those biases could just, I guess, go away or not even be spoken, it's hard enough, but that was the biggest bias that I ever faced. And I don't know, it left me kind of flabbergasted.
Yes, thanks for pointing that out, Dominique. So it's not just some of the things that you felt as that made you feel that you were other than or not as good as everyone else, and then to have that come out as you were trying to defend yourself against a horrible assault. That is not a good feeling. And I can't imagine what it was like to go through that, but you did go through that and you have come out stronger on the other side. So we're so thankful for that. And thank you again for sharing. And so that was your experience in the military with discrimination. Now that you have transitioned to local government, are you facing any discrimination in your job now because of your experience in the military?
I am. And this is kind of like a typical thing with the people that I work with in the office. When I came there, I don't want to use these terms, but there's really there was no organization. It was like a free-for-all. And the office itself was like very disorganized. And when I got there, and I want to say that's why I was put in that department, because I was the only veteran. So once I got there, I immediately hey, we have to do this to organize. We need structure for this. We need this, this, and this. And people didn't like that at first. I was being called aggressive, crazy, just, different things like that. People would say, oh, this ain't the military. you know, we live like this, we do things by our rules here. And then it was, you know, certain times where, especially because some of my coworkers do know that I have PTSD, you know, regarding what happened in the military, and hearing the jokes about that, or about them being afraid to set me off or anything like that because they don't want me to come in there and like shoot it up. Seriously. That's the kind of stuff that bothers me. Again, because I wouldn't have the PTSD, you know, but it's like, I have it, so don't make it worse, if that makes any sense.
Dominique. So I'm glad you brought up PTSD, because that is a common misconception that I hear a lot as I talk to different people. You know, if you've been in the military, you've been deployed, you are infantry or in the Marines, or medical service, that you've experienced these horrible things and you have PTSD and you could just snap at any time. But the reality is that the military makes up less than 1% of our population, which means there are thousands and thousands of people in the workforce, many more than our military, with PTSD. So PTSD is not just from combat. It can be from assault. It can be from a car accident. It can be from any number of things. So for anyone who thinks that it's just the military that struggles with PTSD, that is not the case. So thank you for bringing that up, Dominique. Marty, do you want to talk about any experience in local government that you've experienced?
Yeah, you know, PTSD, I think, is definitely at the top. I serve on a foundation here, and they cater to veterans. And one of the biggest misperceptions is that all veterans have PTSD. So it's not just even in local government. It is definitely throughout, I think, the society. But it's just something I think we all need to be aware of. One thing that I heard, I'd probably not even been here in my city for a month, and one of the council members had to make a comment that previously they had hired a Marine, but he was too rigid. And I hope I'm not going to be like that. And I'm like, okay, is that a hint? Do I need to watch out my back with a council member? So it's just a very interesting exposure to what I felt immediately. I've even heard veterans are overly rigid in that we all expect everybody to have that same military discipline. The sad part is they only seem to understand that from watching TV or watching what's on the movies. When I was stationed in Colorado, I had one actually truly come and believe that I had a weapon on my desk. I had a fifth of liquor in my desk, and I was smoking cigars. And they were very genuine about that. I kind of laughed at first, and then I realized, wait a minute, they're very serious. And I had to dispel, no, that's what you see on TV. That is not the real world at all. You can't even smoke inside buildings anymore. So again, a grave misperception. I was told as a senior military officer that I should not expect people to come to attention as a civilian, or that they're not going to call me sir. And I'm like, okay, I'm okay with that. I don't wear the uniform anymore. It's not what I expect at all. But because that was brought to my attention immediately, I just found that somewhat off-putting, I'll be honest with you. And I feel like now I have to go overboard a little bit to make sure that people feel very comfortable with me and that I break down those misperceptions.
I feel the same way. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. I feel the same way as you, Marty. Like I really have to work extra hard to be nice or be open and everything else.
Mm-hmm. Well, even for the Air Force, I mean, everybody thinks I was a pilot. And I'm like, no, not everybody in the Air Force is a pilot. I'm sorry. I fixed the runways, I repaired them, I built them, but I didn't fly a plane. And I really don't know too many people that were in World War II. I don't know them. And there's always that perception that we all know everybody in the military, no matter when that individual served. So there's some humor in that as well. And I always try to take that with a grain of salt as well. Thank you.
Yeah, and I think that goes back to what I said in the beginning, which is we all live in our own little bubble and experience our own little piece of reality. So if we're not living in someone else's world, we don't understand. And I think maybe some of that relies on us to help educate the people that we work with, to say, you know, this might sound funny, but really it's just a little bit offensive to me, and this is why. I know you didn't mean to do it, but this is how it makes me feel. So I think some of that comes back to us too, to help educate. And that's one of the reasons we're doing this today. And Henry, I know you have a story to share about your experience in local government and having to defend the fact that you were in the military, and that doesn't make you act in any one prescribed way.
Hey, yeah, so I think I'll actually take a different approach to this portion of the conversation. You know, I came into my role on the 1st of April, 2020, and it wasn't an April Fool's joke. You know, COVID was in full effect, or in the beginning of going into full effect, and it actually, my military experience and the way that I dealt with other things in the past became a resource and became an asset for me and the town that I serve in. And there were some things that came up throughout the summer of 2020, the different measures of unrest and disruption and all that. So I was able to have some really good conversations and relate to our first responders in a different kind of way than maybe someone who had not had, you know, the depth and breadth of experiences that I've had along the way. So, you know, from that perspective or that angle, it became a benefit both to me and to the town. And we had a situation not far from here. I won't name the location, but something happened. And, you know, I went into discussions with our leaders within the town from a functional perspective. And I said, okay, talk to me about, you know, we would say continuity of operations and adjustments and those type of things, but talk to me about your if this then what plan. You know, we may use, as a veteran, we may use certain terms, but you know, instead of using those terms, I would flip it into what is the bottom line I'm trying to get to. So if it's a if this then what, let's talk about that. And so those type of things became, again, something that allowed our teams to have the measure of successes and comforts. Now, are there times where I wonder why someone said a certain thing a certain kind of way or certain phrases? Sure. But you know, I for this moment, I'll choose the positive approach.
That's a great point, Henry. And on that, does anyone in the audience have any questions they want to ask? You can put it in the chat or just speak up. All right, well, I am going to ask one final question then for each of our panelists. We do have about 7 minutes left here, but on taking Henry's point, let's end on a positive note. There are so many negative things going on in our lives, and I really like to try and focus on the positive. So can each of you tell me one thing that, one good thing that would have not happened in your life if it weren't for having been in the military?
Well, for me, the lifestyle that I live now, it would not have been afforded to me if I had not joined the military. And I hate, you know, what happened to me, but at the same time, it gave me a different direction. When I was in the military, I didn't really, well, I had discipline, but I couldn't really focus in school. I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do. I was just doing what the military told me to do. But when I got out, I didn't have anybody to do that anymore. So I relied on that discipline that was instilled in me. Not only that, but I started setting goals for myself, which was something that I was taught in the military, to set goals for yourself. And then it also paid for me to go to school, which was something that I could not afford when I was a single mom. And from that, I was able to get an associate's, a bachelor's, a master's, get out of Houston, which was my biggest goal. And not only that, but it also has helped pave the way for my children, because their college is paid for. And it's just really, I have to look at it like that. It was a benefit in several different ways.
Dominique, I admire your perseverance and everything that you have done with your life. Being a single mom in and of itself is so hard, and you've done so much more. I'm going to let Marty and Henry speak real quickly, and then Evan will come to you with your questions. So Marty, do you want to go next?
Yeah, real quick, obviously my family. I've been able to meet my wife in the military. We were at the same base, but then we have 2 kids, and to see how resilient they are as they start their first job. My son just got his first adult job, as we call it, just a month ago. And my daughter is doing very well with her company after 3 years. And just seeing that in them, and they experienced the military from a very different perspective. My second point I want to mention quickly, don't want to take away from Henry's time, but be able to help other veterans in this kind of setting is great. And I will tell you, in the greater Atlanta area, the appreciation for military and for veterans is outstanding. And to be able to be a part of that because of the experiences I had from the military is just amazing to me. And I appreciate that.
Thank you, Marty. And Henry, what about you?
Yeah, so I echo same regarding family and you know, all the things that have been said ultimately. So, but I never would have thought about this line of work had it not been for my military experience. So in 2018, in a snowstorm, is when I got the idea of what my job could potentially equate to. So the beginning of my Air Force career started kind of wild, and I guess the beginning of my municipal experience started as a result of a snowstorm. But, you know, just doing a comparison. And so it all worked out. It all worked out. So I'll yield so we have time for the question.
Thank you, Henry. And Evan, what is your question?
Yeah, hi. I'm currently active duty. I'm a product manager for weapon systems at the Detroit Arsenal, Michigan. Very curious in going into local government once I retire. So my first question is, have those that have experienced both the military and the local government, have you found that it's been easier to navigate the bureaucracy of local government than versus the military and the federal government? And then second question is there some sort of recurring venue where folks like you convene and hopefully be able to answer some questions that folks like me may have regarding transitioning into that career field? Over. Thank you.
Well, Evan, I'm going to post my contact information in the chat here, but our Veterans Local Government Management Fellowship is a great opportunity, but I can help connect you to resources and other things as well. So please reach out to me. That's one of the things that we do, is connect veterans to local government. Does anyone want to take Evan's question about navigating bureaucracy?
Yeah, I'll go. I'll walk softly. So if you have not watched a local government proceedings and the meetings and all of those type of things, because I never did it before 2018, start doing that. If you have interest in being in local government, and if you have an opportunity to participate in a committee, commission, or board or something like that, that way you get an understanding or start to learn the way that some of these things go in the interaction, because it's not the same and the language is not the same. So that would be my guidance and advice, and to seek out a informational interview with various individuals in the fields that you're looking at.
Great point, Henry.
Sure. I appreciate that. I have reached out, and I've, for whatever reason, found the local city manager type folks to be somewhat perhaps distrustful or not real comfortable with answering questions or letting at least me know what it's like to walk in their shoes for whatever reason. Maybe I just found the wrong people, but that's kind of what I've experienced.
So just real quickly, reach out to somewhere not near you.
Yeah, and Evan, if you, like I said, if you reach out to me, we can talk a little bit more about this and why that might be happening. And we can certainly put you in contact with Marty, Henry, Dominique, or some of our other Veterans Advisory Committee folks. I just want to thank our presenters. You were amazing, and you all have done so many great things in your careers. I just admire all of you, and thank you very much for your service to our country and to your local communities. Great job today. And for our audience, thank you so much. I recognize many of your names, but like I said, if you have any questions or want to get involved with our veterans programs, please reach out to me, and I look forward to talking to you. Thank you, Laura. I think this completes the session.